So first of all, good morning and welcome to the final briefing in this series. This briefing is on policing strategies for at-risk youth, the role of police in prevention and intervention. This briefing series started in the fall of 2014. We've had a lot of really great, compelling briefings on various subjects from status offenses to youth and adult confinement to this briefing today. And while we don't have any further briefings in this series planned, we do want you to know that we will continue to be a resource for you in your work. Both Vera and the Center on Youth Justice. And we have the director of our Center on Youth Justice here today, Krista Larson. For those of you who are not familiar with Vera, we use research and evidence to make justice systems fairer, and our CYJ specifically works with state and federal policymakers and practitioners to make their juvenile justice systems more effective through narrowing the number of children in the system and making these systems more grounded in the community. We want to thank, first of all, the MacArthur Foundation for supporting these briefings. We also want to thank all the Senate offices that have helped us with these room reservations, including Senator Blumenthal's office. And I think hopefully there's someone here from the office today. And we also want to thank all of the staff who have come to these briefing series. We hope that they've been educational and informative. We also want to recognize the administrator of OJJDP, Bob Listenby. Where did you go, Bob? He's sitting right up front. He's been obviously a key figure for the administration in juvenile justice issues, but I think this is an issue that's obviously close to your heart, Bob, as we know, and you've been a big leader in Philadelphia on some of the disproportionate minority contact stuff that Kevin Bethel will talk about, and so we really appreciate your presence here, your support for these issues, and your leadership on these issues. So now I'm going to turn things over to our moderator, Hassan Aden. And we're really excited to have Hassan moderating this panel. First of all, because he's relatively new to Vera. He's our new, we have some AV work going on now. But Hassan is our new senior policing advisor, and he's going to be helping us in our policing work to make policing better informed by community needs. Hassan is the founder of the Aden Group. He's the former chief of police in Greenville, North Carolina, and he's also the former deputy chief of police in Alexandria, Virginia. Previously, Hassan served as the director of research and programs at the International Association for Chiefs of Police, and he oversaw programs to improve policing services, practices, and policies. So Hassan, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, this is good. We've got our AV going. Thank you all for your interest in this series. This is a topic that, anytime you turn on the news, read a newspaper, you hear about sort of policing and criminal justice reform. And there's one common thread along all of that. Don't mind that, it's all good, it's all right. Just have to keep talking, right? The common thread is, how do we as a system address youth? And I will tell you, for me, when I first came on in the mid-'80s as a young police officer in the DC metropolitan area, I was part of that sort of social harm based on policies that were lined in with zero tolerance. There were no diversion programs. There was nothing. It wasn't until years later, when I became a school resource officer, that I realized, how our policies were actually impacting the community. And that's sort of, every police officer has that spark, that one time when you ask yourself, why are we doing this? And when you realize that, and I'll tell you how I realized it. About 6 months into my school year, I obviously, formed relationships with the students. And one morning, a young man who had been involved in the system came in and he said, hey, my dad was arrested last night. I'm really sort of worried about it. He's not out. So there was a bail issue. It was a low-level nonviolent offense. And then, so I started working with that student, gave him some counseling, but I also linked him up with a counselor. About 3 weeks later, he came back in and said, "We're getting evicted. My dad lost his job." And, so you can sort of see how this thing begins to spin out. And as a young officer, that was my moment. And, fast forward years later, when I was running police departments, I was cognizant of that. And we changed the way that we performed our duties in schools. So that's why I'm passionate about it, because I know that this matters. And if we get this right, it will impact generations in a positive way. If we get this wrong, it will impact generations in the same way that we're impacting them today, in most places. So I want to introduce our panel. I'm cognizant of the time. We've got Kevin Bethel, whose name is, anytime you hear about juvenile justice reform, Kevin's name comes up. Kevin is the former Deputy Commissioner in the City of Philadelphia Police Department, and is now a Diana A. Milner Youth Justice Fellow at the Stoneleigh Foundation. He'll tell you a little more about his background and experience and the wonderful work that they're doing in Philadelphia. Then we also have Lieutenant Kevin Kirkham. He's a commander of the Juvenile Sex Crimes Domestic Violence Unit, a detective unit essentially, in the Lake Charles Police Department in Louisiana. We have, at the end, William Lucky, a student at Eastern. We're lucky to have William Lucky here today, a student at Eastern High School, and you'll hear his story here in DC. And we have Luis Pyers, founder and executive director of the Connecticut Alliance to Benefit Law Enforcement, Cable Incorporated. It's a national, it's an organization that essentially, she'll talk about CIT and CIT youth, which is a very little known phenomena and very necessary throughout the country. So these are our panelists, and we'll go ahead and get started. Kevin Bethel.
You don't have it? It's fine. We're good? So I'm just going to go without it, right? I don't think they have my slides, but I'm good without them. I'm just going to keep on moving. All right, I'm just going to go without my slides. I know there's a lot of young people here, so I was going to have some exciting, dynamic slides, but that's not necessary. So as first, before I even start anything, I just got to recognize two people who have meant a lot to me and helped me everything I do. As you indicated, Administrator Rob Lissaby and Scott Pestry, who's the Senior Policy Advisor at OJJDP, who really helped shape me to be where I'm at today. So I just want to thank them and always acknowledge them in public. So as you heard Aiden say, I got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to move fast, but I know you're going to be able to stay with me. I got a great program. I'm going to try to pack it in that 10 minutes. I know you got the lights, the numbers here. But I just retired from the Philadelphia Police Department as a former Deputy Commissioner of the Philadelphia Police Department. I ran the patrol operations for the city of Philadelphia. And I came to this place. In my career where I want more about being purpose-driven and what I could do with young people in our system that were going in, particularly African-American young men who were going into the system at a disproportionate amount. And so one of the things I looked at, and as part of my job, was I had the school district, and I oversaw the school police. And so about May of 2014, I started to run the numbers. And the numbers were bad. 1,600 young people get arrested in the school district every year in the city of Philadelphia. 1,600. Kids, so a 10-year-old child who walked into a school in the city of Philadelphia with a pair of scissors with no reason or purpose to do anything with any child or anyone else would be taken from that school, fingerprinted, photographed, held in a cell block for 6 hours, asked for a parent to come get them. Then they would go next day, someone would decide, well, I don't think the kid should be in the system any further. We'll send them out to the youth aid panel. They'll go out to the youth aid panel, which consists of police officers and community folks. They would make out a program for those kids and what they should or should not do. And then if they stayed out of trouble for 6 months, they get the record expunged. Are you kidding me? I mean, really, are you kidding me? We're talking about a 10-year-old child who came into school with a pair of scissors. We're talking about kids who are coming from very difficult backgrounds, who are just being captured in this process for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And so I came to this place and said it had to stop. And so I started down this process of saying, what could we do? And so we identified the crimes that were being committed in the school system. Most of our kids, the majority of our kids, 60% of our kids were being arrested for getting into a fight in the hallway, coming to school with a weapon. And I'm not talking about a gun. No one in here is talking about guns. No one in this room wants guns in the room. But a kid who comes in, my young ladies who come to school with mace or pepper spray because they feel that coming from home to school is something to protect them, were being arrested. Kids who worked after school, who had a box cutter, who came through the metal detector, would have be arrested. And so we looked at those crimes, and 70% of those crimes were for low offenses that many of your rooms, especially the folks, I see some guys my age in the room, that we would have never, ever thought. I went to the public school system. My kids go through a metal detector. I never, ever went through a metal detector, and I came from one of the toughest communities in the city. You know, we didn't go through metal detectors. My kids go through metal detectors. You know, and so we looked at those crimes and said we had to do something about it. And I said, well, listen, you know, and Administrator Lisaby was part of the Defender Association. Well, they had a great youth aid panel and a great panel on the post side. I came to this place that I wanted to move that up to the pre. At the beginning of the process, I came to this place about what did it mean to be involved in trauma? What was I doing to a child, that 10-year-old child, when I walked him out of that school in handcuffs and just took him into the police station? And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We never asked them why. We didn't ask them any questions. We just looked at them and processed them and moved them along. You'd be amazed when you start asking the questions when, what, where, and why, and you find all those things. And so what we decided, we came to a process, we're going to do a pre-arrest diversion. So here, let's take that scenario now for that 10-year-old child. That 10-year-old child, when we walk into school, my officers stop, and they give him and his parent a letter. That letter says within 72 hours, our partnership was with a large collaborative group, the DA's office, the Defenders Association, the school district. I mean, I can name them all, but one of our core partners is the Department of Human Services. In our city, in our county, the Department of Human Services provides all the support services for the criminal justice system. I partnered with them to give me the same programs that you went to see the judge. We got the programs up front. That's an amazing piece. You heard Aiden say, policing had to change. For a long time, I don't care about social work. That's not my job. My job to come on the police department was to make arrests. Give me a pair of handcuffs and go to town. What happens when the police officer says, you know what? I don't have to be a social worker, but I can bring some in to help me. I don't have to be a social worker, but I can bring behavioral in to help me. I don't have to be any of those things, but if I open up the door, when I opened up the door, the floodgates just came collapsing in. And so they gave me those programs up front. So that same 10-year-old child, when we walk into the school district, we give them a letter and we go to their houses. Within 72 hours, a social worker, often accompanied by one of the police officers, goes to the house to do a home assessment. And we find all that junk that we all know about, deep poverty. They kill me with that, the deep poverty. Well, deep poverty is, I've known deep poverty since I've been in policing all my career. I opened up a door and I think I was in a third world country sometime. 8 kids living in a 1-bedroom house. No bedding, no house, no heat, no electric. Well, we're addressing those issues now. We're addressing those issues not with the child itself, but the family issues as well. Are there addiction issues in the family? Are there other kids in there who are having problems? And we're doing a whole complete assessment of those kids. And then we move them into programs. We move them into those same programs, and they'll stay 30, 60, 90 days in their program. And here's the other thing that people hate. If I show you my chart up here, I would go through my schematics, and you wouldn't see a stick. Say, oh my God, wait a minute. So you do this, and you do this without forcing the kids to go. You know what? We walk into those rooms, we empower parents for the first time. We give those parents power. We look at this approach that says, listen, for many of those families, when we get to their homes, they say, where have you been? If I lock up a kid, I can get wrap around, wrap over, I got all kinds of services. Don't lock him up and does he have a Medicare card? Does he have insurance? Can we get him into those programs? So many of those parents were looking for programs anyway. 90% of our kids are participating in the program and they volunteer. The other 10%, we tell them, listen, we convince them, like officers try to convince them, it's so important to take advantage of the program. But if they don't, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It was a fight in the hallway. They got suspended for a week. That's where it's supposed to have been anyway. And so I don't sit there and get upset because, hey, guess what? I don't have the stick because I didn't lock up the kid for fighting in the hallway. Man, we used to fight in the hallway during the day and play ball in the afternoon. You know, I never, ever imagined that a cop would come down my hallway and lock me up from fighting my boy, Kevin. Are you kidding me? I couldn't imagine that. And so here's the numbers. We started out in May of 2014, and we dropped 54% in our first year. We went from over 1,600, almost 1,600 arrests to a little over 790 arrests, a 54% reduction. This year, we're on pace to drop even another 20%. For a 70% reduction, we have about 500 kids that we've arrested in this process. And that would have been arrested are being diverted. And so we're down to 500. We went from a system 2 years ago that's 1,600 kids to a system now that's locking up 500, and we're cutting into those now. Because we're doing a whole process of collateral consequences with our kids now and talking about and getting into more preventive modes. And here's the other kicker. We did the first 800 of our kids. You know how many kids came back? 800 kids we've diverted since we started May of 2014. 36. So they're not coming back. So you can change this process. You can make things happen, but you got to get in there and make it happen. And so we've been also fortunate to get a grant with the Office of Juvenile Justice Prevention, not because the administrator is my friend. We went through the application process, and we got a grant that says keeping kids out of court and in school. It had my name all over it. That's my grant. And as he knows, 2 years ago, that's my grant, and I'm going for it. We are blessed to get a $600,000 grant to be able to bring on the Office of Juvenile Justice Prevention, supporting us and doing research. So we have Drexel University, where I'm hosted as part of my fellowship, who's doing the research, Naomi Goldstein, where we're analyzing all the work and all the stuff that happened with the kids. So we're just not interested in the numbers itself. We're interested in the child as well. Are the programs we're putting them, are they working? Are those kids being successful? Are we meeting our goals of trying to change the lives of these young people? So it's not just about numbers, it's about the kids. I call them my kids, because I'm in a different place in my life now. These are my kids, and I protect them, I fight for them, and I work for them. And that's part of this process of changing this whole paradigm. And so when I see these young folks in the room and I see the energy you have in the room, if this 52-year-old man can have the energy he has up here, what we need is that legislative push. What we need is folks to line up with us and say, hey, you know what? I understand the Gun-Free Act said no guns in school. But how did the Gun-Free Act turn into a kid who walked in school with a pair of scissors? How did we get to that place? And how do we get out of that place? And some of these places across in jurisdictions across the country are going to need more than me and Kevin Bethel or Aiden or my friends on the panel coming there talking about what they want to do. It's going to require legislative support as well to change this paradigm from where it started to where it can go be. And we hope to be a demonstration model to show that you can do it up front, you can get those services in early, and you can change the lives of young people and make the projection to a great place. So I'd love to sit up here for 2 hours, but I'm going to cut my conversation because I see that other piece get ready to come up, and I don't think there's a 30-second one there. And I'll pass it off to the moderator. Thing.
Hello. I'm going to echo some of what Kevin had to say. Even in the South, we're moving in a different direction, deep South. All right, my name is Kevin Kirk. I'm a 28-year veteran of the Lake Charles Police Department. I've worked as a patrol officer. I've worked as a narcotics detective, a robbery homicide detective, a task force officer with the U.S. Marshal's Office, a field training coordinator officer for the police department, and now I'm the commander of my juvenile sex crime and domestic violence unit. In all those years and all my different assignments, I've noticed one thing. Our offenders were getting younger and younger. Now, I know that there are a variety of reasons and things that can cause that, but one of them is when we have a child that's at risk and they're not getting any help and getting any guidance, then it's hard to turn them back to being a hard, good working citizen. So that's where our MARC Center comes in our city and parish. All right? MARC for us stands for Multi-Agency Resource Center. Now, some of those agencies that are involved, just a few, are our judgeships. Our judges are behind it. Of course, the police department, sheriff's department, our Department of Child and Family Services, and our family and youth counseling. That's just to name a few. And the goal of our MARC is similar to their program, is that we want to help the child and the family change their behavior, get the guidance, and be taught without putting them into the criminal justice system, without putting them into the court system. We also use our MARC. It can be reutilized in times of crisis or whatnot. So instead of a family calling law enforcement for everything, they can directly call the MARC Center. Now, for policing, in my perspective, as where I went on through the years, I'm trying to say this is very important. We're getting some things done. I'm gonna give you a few examples, and I'm trying to get through them real quick. In the past, and I say the past, remember I've been there 28 years, when a child would commit a minor offense, a theft, a battery, that nobody got hurt, property damage, or a status offense like runaway or ungovernable, we would go as police officers and arrest them, bring them to the police department. And we got to find the parent, and we'd sit there. Here again, nobody's talking to the kid. We're just there. We're trying to do the paperwork, maybe call a judge or somebody to see if this kid could be locked down in a facility. Nothing was being done for the child. Also, I'm taking an officer off the road for extended periods of time. That officer needs to be out there in service. So, as Kevin said, nobody was getting to the root of the problem. With the establishment of MARC now, in that scenario, our downtime for police officers is 15 to 30 minutes. That officer can get back to service. The child is picked up, taken directly to MARC, and they have a staff there that does an assessment on the child immediately, as soon as they go through the front door. And they're using the Jiffy method, the SASSY method, the Macy method, all these assessments in one thing, so that they can find out what agency, where does that child need to go to get them the help that they need. And on top of that, when they do locate the parent or the guardian, the parent and the guardian has to do an assessment. So now I'm helping the police officer, he's back on the road, the child is being treated, and the family is being treated. Another example about it's not just the kids in our community, and this is a problem. Let me explain to you where Lake Charles is. I am 4 hours west of New Orleans. I am 3 hours east of Texas, east of Houston, Texas, on the I-10 corridor. We're a melting pot, all right? So we get runaway kids all the time from different jurisdictions. In the past, officer goes out, locates a kid, they're from New Orleans. You know how long that officer would be off the road? 4, 5, 6 hours maybe. Same thing for Houston. We give the same services for kids that are coming in that may get for runaway. We can't lock them down because they hadn't committed an offense. We can't put them in a locked facility anywhere because they running from something or running to something. So we have a staff now at the MARC Center to find out what these underlying reasons are. Last example that I'm gonna give you is, and I'm pretty sure this is a common service call in any jurisdiction. Get to a house, the mother or grandparent says, look, I just can't control my child anymore. I just can't do it. They're misbehaving, they're not listening, they're coming in all hours of the day and the night. It's affecting my home and it's affecting my work. Officer, can you please take my child? In the past, officers would go, no, the child hasn't committed an offense, but we can talk to your child, but that's all we can do. Now we have a MARC Center. That child has committed no crime. Now we can actually take the child to the MARC Center and they'll start the assessment process, or we can simply give them the phone number, here, call the MARC Center. Now, since 2011, since the MARC is open, in our community, 6,357 families have been serviced in our community. 1,242 of them were direct law enforcement referrals. I mean, they came to law enforcement and we directly told them to get to the MARC Center. The 1,187 were just walk-ins. Now, some of the services, and these are community-linked services that the MARC provides, and I'm sure you all are familiar with some of them: functional family therapy, multi-systemic therapy, crime victims and trauma, individual counseling, psychiatric consultation, anger management, substance abuse. We have mentoring partnerships, and we also have the employment partnerships for those kids that are a little bit old and able to work. Since we started the MARC in 2011, my department has seen a 35% decrease in juvenile arrests. 2011, we had 355. 2012, 252. 2013, 251. 2014, 248. 2015, 241. There are a lot of contributing factors to that, but one that I contribute to is the MARC. Now we don't have to keep going to a house 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times for the same problem. We can go one time, give the family, the child the services, direct them where they need to be, and find the root of the problem so that the child can change their behavior. So from a policing perspective, I know we're all used to policing just locking up folks and doing that, and that's part of the job. And I know at some time that is going to happen. But by and large, if we change what we're doing and try to get to the root of the problem, I think every jurisdiction should be funded some kind of way to have a Mark Center or something similar. All right? Thanks.
I'm short, so I have to bring this down. Thank you for inviting me to this seminar. I think it's so exciting to hear what other people are doing and other jurisdictions are doing. It's just phenomenal. And I'm here to share a little bit about what Connecticut is doing for our at-risk youth. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about what brought me to this point where I am now, where I was a marriage and family counselor and now working with seriously mentally ill folks, as well as youth and training law enforcement officers in CIT Youth, the CIT program. Back in 1997, I had a young relative who was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. He was at school. He was continuing to see his doctor. He was following all the recommendations, going home periodically for med checks, and doing quite well. After about 6 months, he had some difficulty. He was becoming more and more depressed. So he went back to his doctor and said, I'm not doing well at all. I am feeling very, very, very bad. And I don't know where this is going. And keep in mind, he had been suicidal in the past. So his doctor upped his medication and basically doubled his medication, his antidepressant medication, to see if he could give him a jump start in terms of feeling better. Now, this is after HIPAA. This young man was 19 years old at the time, so his parents could not be informed of what he was going through, and he chose not to tell his parents because he didn't want to worry his parents. He went back to school, and 6 days later, he was in a full-blown manic state. We found out after this that he had been misdiagnosed, which is very, very easy to do, especially with young people, between major depressive disorder and bipolar depression. So he became very suicidal again. He had tried suicide a few times before. It didn't work. He felt the best way to do it is with a gun, but he didn't have a gun. His parents didn't own a weapon. So he said, gee, who has guns? Please do. So he led police at a high-speed chase. He was able to get the attention of one particular officer who, when he stopped, the officer got out of his car, and this young man took a bottle out of the car, a champagne bottle, and went over to the cruiser and banged it on the cruiser. And then he went towards the officer and said, "You better shoot me or I'll kill you." The officer was backing up into the road. It was 4:30 in the morning, so there was no traffic at that point in time. However, there could be anybody coming around a corner because it was right by a corner. And so the police officer at that point felt he really had no other choice than to shoot him, and he did. This young man survived and is doing well now. But it was devastating to the family, to the whole family, extended family, his community, the officer's family, and those around that officer, his department. It was something that had an unbelievable ripple effect in terms of the people that it affected. Because this young man was never in trouble with the law before, did not have a criminal history, was a good kid, and then this happened because of his illness. He took full responsibility for what happened, even though he was ill at the time, mentally ill, and was able then to work with police to talk about his suicide attempt and what that was like and what was going through his mind in order to help police better understand, that process. But that's what brought me into the foray of looking at, police training, looking at the way the options that were out there for law enforcement officers, and realizing and understanding that law enforcement officers have incredibly difficult jobs, especially under these highly stressful situations where they have to make a split-second decision. Our family never blamed the law enforcement officer, but we wanted to support him in any way we could. So one of the things that we started to research was what was out there for police training, what was out there to support law enforcement around this issue. And we discovered the CIT program that was started in Memphis, started doing some research, and found that we had a police captain in New London, Connecticut, who had just was the first department in Connecticut and the first in New England to implement CIT. He agreed to be a champion to bring the program statewide. His name is Captain Ken Edwards. And as a result of that, CIT is now in 92 agencies within the state of Connecticut. And they're not only local, they're local, state, and federal agencies in Connecticut. Over 2,500 law enforcement officers and mental health professionals have been trained. Back in 2004, the Surgeon General published a paper about mental illness in children and how 25% of kids with mental illnesses have a diagnosed mental illness, but a quarter of those kids don't get any help. They're not identified, and they're not receiving the help that could benefit them. And as a result, we started looking at, and many other agencies across the country started looking at, how can we best help these at-risk kids? And there are fantastic programs out there that are very effective, highly effective. But there was one place where there didn't seem to be much, and that was from the sequential intercept model of where's that first place where the law enforcement, criminal justice community can intervene. And that's when law enforcement come into contact. The lieutenant mentioned about, families calling law enforcement as a last resort. They didn't know what to do. They may not have known that their child had a mental illness. Maybe they thought, well, it was growing pains, or kids do stupid things sometimes, but they weren't able to connect that. It could have been a mental illness, where a law enforcement officer can objectively look at this and say, you know what, let's take a look. How about we call, and what we have in Connecticut is called EMPS, Emergency Mobile Psych Services, where a clinician will come out to the home and look at, assess the family and the child for services that are needed and get those services in place. So the MacArthur Foundation had funded a great program called CIT Youth, and we were able in Connecticut, our judicial department was able to implement it. And so we trained through cable, we trained a number of our law enforcement officers and mental health clinicians in how to do the CIT youth training. We've offered it now to SROs all over the state of Connecticut, youth officers. It always depended on funding, and many times we didn't have the funding, so we had to kind of wait and look at other creative ways. We partnered with other agencies, other police departments to find ways to do this. We've also expanded on the CIT youth model to include more information about trauma, because a lot of kids are acting out because they've been traumatized and they're dealing with a serious trauma history. And many times they get into trouble at school or at home because of that trauma history. So again, we're growing it by leaps and bounds. It's always around funding, though. We always have to, find ways to be able to get that funding in order to continue this training. We don't want to charge law enforcement officers for the training. We feel that they are doing hard work, and they are already being cut in many places, and their training budgets are kind of small in Connecticut. So that's where we are now. We're very, very proud of our CIT youth program. But just to end, there was a situation where a law enforcement officer who had used the CITY concept had helped a little girl. At the time, she was probably about 7 years old, who was traumatized as a result of a domestic violence incident. And he connected her with services. He was able to try to mitigate her trauma by removing her from the scene, talk with her, calm her, tell her she was, that she was safe, and again, connect the whole family to services. About 8 months later, they were doing a drug raid, and it was at the same house. And the little girl, as they were checking out to see where the best entryway to go in was, he looked at the top floor, and this little girl was in the window. And as they were getting ready to go up the front stairs, she went. And he looked at her, and so they went around the back. And come to find out, the dealers were at that front door with their weapons ready to shoot the first police officer that came in that house. And so we can even say it's not only beneficial to our kids out there who are at risk and who are struggling, but it also is beneficial to our law enforcement officers as well. And it's something that we really do believe in, and we feel that there is a great need, and to be able to stop that cycle, and to be able to help the children that we are responsible for in our lives. Thank you.
How y'all doing today? How y'all doing? All right, my name William. I'm ready to start. I'm a little nervous, so. All right, you ready? All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is William Lucky, and I am a 17-year-old junior at Easton High School here in Washington, D.C. I am excited to be here today to share my story, and I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel. A year or so ago, I might not have thought my story was special or that there wasn't anything unique for me to share. But after participating in the Youth Creating Change program with the D.C. Police Department, my self-esteem has strengthened, and now I know I am destined for great things. My relationship with the police officers in my neighborhood before I joined YCC was cool. I never had any bad encounters with the police or any bad experiences. My father was incarcerated for 10 years, but now he's home, and ever since he's been home, he never went back. I've had pretty good interactions with police growing up, but for many in my neighborhood, dealing with police hasn't always been the best. Getting slammed on the ground or the hood of your car was something my family and friends had to deal with daily. Getting profiled for being young and black and in the wrong place at the wrong time was something I had to grow up with. To see an officer on the street, though, was kind of a regular occurrence in my neighborhood of Ben & Terrace here in D.C. Sometimes it even felt as though the police weren't even there. My neighborhood is known as Simple City, although most days things are far from simple. We have shootings that seem to occur weekly. I've been out playing basketball with my friends when shootings have run out right before us on the court and hitting the ground, and bullets hitting the ground to duck a bullet is very real and traumatizing. My neighborhood is less than 6 miles from the Capitol building we're in today. We don't have to travel across an ocean to find a war zone. Some days it's just over the river. In order to improve the relationship between cops and youth in D.C., the D.C. Police Department formed the Youth Creating Change program that began in December of 2014. It was funded by the COPS office through the Department of Justice. Its goal is to connect young people and police officers here in the neighborhoods that make up D.C. The youth chosen for the program identify as leaders in their neighborhoods, some positive leaders and some not so positives, but we're all leaders, and that's why we were picked. Officer Casey chose me. He saw me as a leader in my neighborhood of Benning Terrace. To Officer Casey, who is here today, I say thank you for seeing my greatness that is in me. When I joined YCC, my perceptions of police certainly changed. I began to not only see the officers, but also understand why they were there. Their job is to serve us and to make sure we are safe. But what I missed before is they are just like us. They are regular people. Someone once told me, if you see an officer, say hello. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them how they are doing, because you may not ever know how their day might be going. This simple gesture could make their day, because they see trauma and tragedies that some of us are either immune to or never experienced. And unlike the rest of us, when a police officer puts on their uniform and begins their daily duty, they put their lives on the line. Imagine if that was your mom, dad, sister, brother, or spouse, praying to God every day and not knowing if they will return home to their families and loved ones. Imagine making that sacrifice for that reason. For that reason, I respect them even more. The most impactful part of the YCC program for me was at graduation day. And not because the program was over. I was excited when my song was played over the speakers at the stadium and FedEx Field. You see, my special talent is music. I love to sing. I love to create music, and I love to see people's reaction to my music. For the leaders at YCC to recognize my talent and willingness to share it was something that touched my heart and made me feel like anything in my life can happen as long as I stay focused. I didn't even know it was coming. It shocked me, and it was the best feeling in the world. How many people can say they got their song played over the stadium? Thanks to YCC, I can. I have learned a lot with YCC. I have created an unbreakable bond with the officers who serve DC. They are like my older brothers and sisters. When the program is over, they are the ones I can call on in any situation. They have become mentors. Even though I was only with them for 12 weeks, I feel as though I've known them all my life, and they have become a part of the family. Friends and family begin to ask about these people, eager to learn about what they got going on, and I wonder how can they be a part of the positivity. For me, the officers I dealt with are the ones I trust. I wish there were more officers like the YCC officers. What helps us connect to officers in our neighborhood is sometimes simply just having the same officers assigned to the same patrol areas. When we see the same faces of officers in the community, begins to build positive relationships with them, keep them in those areas. We learn to trust officers because of how we interact with them and how we see them respond to calls and interact with our neighbors. When we constantly have new officers coming in and out the neighborhoods, it's hard for us to build that trust. YCC teaches you more about than just police. They teach you life skills, how to handle yourself in a bad situation. It even taught me things I never knew I would even need to know. But guess what? I did with the info. I took it in and made the best of it. This program really works. It helps people get away from trouble scenarios and gives them options so they can do things differently. Things they never thought they would do before. Things like whitewater rafting. As a 17-year-old black male growing up in the urban city, I never thought in my wildest dream that I would go whitewater rafting. And it was an amazing experience. I can't remember having that much fun. You guys should try it. I fell in the water a couple times, and it was cold and even a little embarrassing. But it was the smiles that were upon all our faces that made it so memorable. I asked myself, where do I see myself, or what do I see myself doing in 10 years? Honestly, I want to work with young people to strengthen not just the next generation, but the generation after. I also want to be a professional singer. Singing is my passion. And after the YCC program, I even got a contract for one of my singles with Def Jam Records. If there's one thing I want you to remember from me being here today, is that when officers are stationed in the neighborhood and they build good relationships with the community they serve, do everything in your ability to leave those officers there. Trust takes a long time to build for both kids and adults in my neighborhood. Trust with the police can mean the matter of life and death. Planting the roots of good officers in tough neighborhoods is a great start to building that trust. Thanks for your time today.
I try to get him safe, man. He's ready to do it too.
You did. He would have. We might still have some time to do that. So I want to thank all of you for being here and in 10-minute time slots explaining, these innovations that really impact people. We all know that behind the scenes, it sounds simple, what you just explained, but there are a lot of things that need to happen in the communities, the interactions with government, negotiations even with your local governments, and the various stakeholders that make these things happen and fund them. So for that, I really want to say thank you for your diligence, your pursuit, and your reluctance to sort of back off, because I know you had challenges on all these things. I want to just start off the Q&A period with William. You mentioned that your dad was incarcerated for 10 years. When he came back, how was that, and how did you learn from his decisions? Was that helpful?
Well, in that time period, I don't think I was born yet when he got out of jail. But from growing up, the stories that he told me, it taught me like how not to go to a place. He actually taught me why you don't want to go to a place like that, and explained to me the better things I can do to be great instead of just being in a jail 24/7 when people are telling you what to do 24/7.
You must be really proud of him.
Yeah.
And he must be really proud of you. I would be. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to go, we have two Kevins here. So I want to go to the Louisiana Kevin. And just very quickly, can you tell us about the assessments? You use some acronyms.
Oh, yes.
And what are they geared toward?
The JIF method is a juvenile inventory for functioning. The MASI, M-A-S-I, is the Massachusetts Youth Screening Inventory, and the SASI is a substance abuse inventory. And all of these functions deal with assessing the child as what stage they're in, where they're at. It can identify specific areas of need. And so that way they'll know what agency to contact. If it's a mental health issue, it's a mental health. If it's a substance abuse, it's substance abuse. If it's just a behavior, maybe they need some anger management. But they're using these different methods to assess the child so they can get the right agency involved.
Excellent. It sounds very efficient. Sounds like by the time they get through the various assessments, that child is going in the right direction to the right place for the right services.
Correct.
Outstanding. Louise, you talked about, obviously, the CIT program and sort of how it developed in the state of Connecticut and then throughout the Northeast. So the crisis intervention program, for those of you that may not be familiar with what that is, it's a training program. It's about 40 hours, and then there's add-ons to it. But essentially, it trains police officers to recognize mental illness and other crises. It trains police officers to de-escalate accordingly and make better decisions about force options or how to essentially walk someone from serious crises to a better place, to a place where they might be more able to listen and to make better decisions. But it trains essentially the officers to also make better decisions. We know that if a police officer decides to take a certain action, depending on what that action is, you can almost always talk someone into taking a swing at you. And we're trying to really change the way that we interact with people, particularly people in crises. So I wanted to ask you, this is, your program deals with youth specifically. That is a very small, many states are nowhere near getting that kind of training. Can you tell us some distinctions between CIT-Y and standard CIT?
Yeah, well, the CIT youth, basically what we target are officers who've already been through the CIT program. CIT-Y is an adjunct to that, and it's youth-specific. I mean, a lot of people sometimes think that children are little adults, but the way we respond to kids is very, very different than we would for an adult. Looking at issues of trauma, understanding that sometimes behaviors can come as a result, maladaptive behaviors can come as a result of trauma, as well as even de-escalation, that it's a little bit different than what you would do for an adult in terms of kind of getting on their level, talking very softly, and even to try to ameliorate or mitigate that trauma at the scene as well. So it's very different in that way. And also the resources that we connect them to are different than the resources for CIT. We have a bifurcated system in Connecticut where we have a Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services for adults. And then we have a separate one for children, which is DCF, Department of Children and Families. So what they did was they used 211, which is an info line, and the officer can call 211 and hit option 1 for crisis. It'll connect them with a clinician. The officer can say, here's what I have. It's a child, here, we're at this home. Can you come and do an assessment? And they will. They will come, or they will follow up the next day. So that family does end up getting services or being offered services once they do an assessment. They will do the same thing at a school where the SRO can call 211 and have an emergency mobile psych services clinician come to assess the child. So, and it's almost like immediate. So that's what really helps in terms of mitigating that situation as quickly as possible.
Excellent, thank you. Kevin, Philadelphia Kevin. I heard about your program before I ever met you. And it was one of those stories that you hear and you say, this is in Philadelphia. It's impacting literally thousands of kids. I want to ask you sort of a management or from a leadership perspective, having sort of grown up around police officers from being a baby cop to leading several police organizations, I know how hard it is to change culture and to sort of change performance metrics. We know that most police departments are driven by performance evaluations or performance measures that are centered on outputs, not so much outcomes. That's something that's starting to change. But the outputs are arrests, tickets that you write, stops that you make, those kinds of things. How did you incentivize the diversion programs and pull the officers, that many officers, away from what they'd known for so long into this new sort of paradigm?
So that's a great question, and you set it up very well. I mean, that's what we were, outcomes and outputs and what they were. So what we had to do was, if we were going down this path, we had to change how we were going to look at the officer as well. And so when you sit there and say to the police officer, how many arrests did you have today? You mean you had the crimes code, you didn't see nothing? Or you say to the officer, you start to gauge, when you do make arrests, I'm going to watch you and see why you made the arrest and ask those questions now. And so what we did with the police officer says, the fewer arrests you have, the better you are. If you engage a child in a different way and don't arrest him, you're going to get points for that. If you are arresting him, then we're going to be coming there inquiring as to why you're making arrests. That was a significant shift for our men and women. But more importantly, we supported that with training, though. Adolescent development training, de-escalation training, all those things that got me to this place that I was being exposed to change my mindset. I started to expose them to it. IEPs. We had a class on how individual education plans with my police officers telling them you should be looking at the IEPs and seeing if a kid's behavior is a manifestation of something that's going on because they have some mental deficiency, then you shouldn't be arresting them. Man, they eat it up. And so it was a balanced approach. Hey, listen, you know what? We're going to talk about, these statistics are not as important anymore. It's what you do with the kid. It's how you work with that child. It's how you move them to the program. And when you bring, I don't want to go long, but I brought 84 men and women into a room who had been locking up children for a good period of time and told them, guess what? I'm putting something new in your toolbox, something in your toolbox where you don't have arrests. When I brought them in May to train them, April to train them, and told them I was going to do this program and didn't do it, they called me every day. Hey, boss, when are you going to do this program? when are you going to do this program? It was so bad, I put a police officer in a room with a notepad and got a cell phone, and we started the program on a carpet. Because they wanted it. What we have failed, and what Aiden had talked about, is fail in policing is to start to integrate those other tools that our men and women need, who want. And what part of that gains legitimacy and trust, and the things that the young man at the end said, because we didn't carry those tools in our toolbox. And you can see, when I see what he talks about down there, what he was doing, and with the officer here who worked with him, having those extra things in your toolbox can make a major difference. So that's how we kind of just really started to change the culture through training and making sure that they were rewarded for not making those arrests.
Thank you. That's a critical piece in reform, is how we incentivize sort of these policy changes. And so if you're ever in those circles and in those conversations, make sure you ask that question, because that's something that, we can talk a good game, we can move some policies in, but if there are some basic structures within the police department that aren't shifted as well, or within any organization that aren't shifted as well, you can't get out of your own way. So very important. Philadelphia has been really an innovator in a lot of different sort of reforms. I remember in about 2007, 2008, I was in Philadelphia at a police executive research forum meeting, and Commissioner Ramsey was there. And at that point, he made a recommendation that essentially that police departments really consider tying in crisis intervention training as a mandate for any officer that carries a taser. And at that point, I was a deputy chief or a captain in the Alexandria Police Department, and I thought, that's a brilliant idea, tying CIT with the issuance of a weapon such as a taser. Because what we were seeing was, when taser first became widely diffused in the field, officers stopped talking to people. When people were combative or didn't follow direction, they got tased. And that's just how, and a taser is less lethal. It still can kill you. So I took that back, stole it from Philly, took it back, implemented it in Alexandria, and what we saw over the next 2 years was about a 40% reduction in taser usage. The officers hated it. They did not want to do this. Because a lot of officers had their tasers for a couple years, and they weren't CIT trained and didn't want, that condition to be set. It was not optional. They had 6 months to get the CIT training, and if they didn't, they had to turn in their taser. Fast forward a few years later, I was the chief in Greenville, North Carolina, much higher use of force rate, along with other corruption issues. But in that particular realm, I brought that in. Also a very highly debated policy position, but I took the debate out of it, and they had 3 months to get CIT trained if they carried tasers, which was most of the patrol force. In the next year, we saw a 50% reduction in taser usage. But not only that, we saw our police officer shootings went from 15, which is off the charts in a city of 100,000, to 1 in 1 year after this policy went into place. So policies and programs, if you think about it in a different way, such as what Philadelphia did, it can actually literally save lives and improve communities. I'm going to open it up to questions from any of you, and they're at your disposal. Yes, sir.
So this is just a general question for the entire panel. What can you say, if any, changes there have been in the attitudes of these young people towards police? Because, the media tries to portray a lot of people against the police, and so with your different diversion programs, have you seen any attitude changes that, people not expecting to be arrested so much as they normally do?
Sir, okay.
As far as putting them in the MARC Center, nobody likes to be locked down, adult or child. And the general attitude of those kids that may be at risk that came into contact with the police, like I said, it's much better because we're not having to keep going back to the same address for the same problem. They're not committing a theft on Monday and then doing a burglary on Wednesday. You know, they're getting the proper direction in which they need to go, and therefore, when they see an officer who's coming out there, our officers are actually talking to them now. They're actually talking to us, talking back, and we're listening to what they're saying. And so, since this program, since the mark, I can tell, especially on the street level, that the attitude is much better. And so, it's a work in progress. It doesn't work for those that have committed serious felony acts all the time, but we're trying to not get them to that level. We want to stop them before they commit those acts and change what they're doing.
So in our regard, it's been extremely positive. I mean, you have to understand, we had situations where we just locked up children, didn't ask anything. And so just really some quick examples. We had a meeting the other day, and one of the young officers is talking about how one of the young girls will be the first there at the door. She's the first one at the door, because for breakfast. You know, she'd be the first one, and she'd get breakfast and lunch, and she was so disheveled and unclean. And so when she wound up getting in trouble, she got diverted. When they get in the house, they find her mom is addicted. And so they get in the house and they do a big program around getting her. And they say, if you see this girl, I said, boss, if you see this girl, she's a model now. She comes in the door, she's so beautiful because now she's so enriched. But she sees the officers as so positive. I have an email, if I was showing you slides and share with you, we get a young lady, marijuana. I used to think, marijuana, they're not self-medicating. That's crap, right? Man, no, we get in there, we find a young lady who's smoking marijuana, parents going through a major divorce. Good parents, bad divorce. She can't deal with it. Her girlfriend say, hey, listen, smoke marijuana, make you feel better. She smokes marijuana and feels better, but she gets caught. As before we were doing our diversion model. But we get her into treatment, get mom into treatment. But here's the big thing. She was in a special mid school. We got met with the principal, be able to keep her in her school. And she's a sophomore at Pitt. And she regularly sends those emails saying, hey, listen, I just am so thankful for what you were able to do for me and keep me on track and get me on track. And so those stories are coming back. Folks are coming back on spring break now, finding my officers because the light bulb finally goes on. Because I have a program that many of my kids never knew they were arrested because they never see the cell block, they never get handcuffed, and we don't do any arrest paperwork. So for many of them, the light bulb goes on a little bit later. And now they're a freshman. I think I was in that school to prison pipeline. Hey, you know what? This is what the call officer did. And one final thing is, halfway through our program, we introduce our young people to our PAL centers. We're fortunate to have a very robust PAL center in the city of Philadelphia. We have 18 PAL centers. So what we made this decision to do at the halfway point through their program, where they're working with their program, we introduce them to their neighborhood PAL center. So at the 91st day, when the parent wants something else to do with their child and can't find it, they have no excuses. Walk them into the PAL center. There's a police officer there. There's programs there. There's homework assessments there. There's a whole wraparound process there that they can work with. So we believe, and we just see it from talking to the kids, that we are changing their attitudes toward policing and their families as well. Not just them, it's about the family as well.
I'm Ben Schwartz from Senator Casey's office. You mentioned school to prison pipeline. What do you think, especially for kids who might come from households with parents that aren't always present, who do you think are the people in the community that are closest to them, if you identify them at risk, to help them get them back on the right track, and what are the best ways to sort of foster collaboration between those people who are actually close to the kids?
For us, those kids are, talking about latchkey kids, come in the front door, go out the back door. They are at risk, and typically if there's not a parent around or guardian around, or one that actually is putting time in with the child, our agency, the Department of Child and Family Services, is who we would go to and try to make sure that the child is getting some assistance. They would be, as far as placement and finding a place for them, they are our placement agency for children.
Well, in our state too, it's the Department of Children and Families. But there's also some natural supports that, people can look at as well. And looking at, are there other family members? Are there, is there an aunt or an uncle or somebody that the child is close to that can kind of take on like a mentorship role? Sometimes churches, sometimes, again, it's looking at the natural supports in the community and seeing what that child's interests are and making those connections as well.
Yeah, I mean, you raise that's the difficulty. I mean, we want to change these kids' lives, but they live in communities, in tough, impoverished communities, and we put them right back in those areas and with nothing. And so that's the challenge. That's why when you hear the conversation about working with these young people and giving them second chances, and because they'll age out, people got us all fooled. I mean, to believe that there's only a small percentage of kids who go on that can recidivate into their adults. Most of these kids will age out of the process. And so when I hear with Kevin in the program they have where kids are coming there, they're working with them, and they come back again, they're working with them. That's what we're not doing, because I mean, many of these kids and minister tell you, I mean, some of these kids never even had anybody love them, even tell them they love them or support them, and so sometimes it's just connecting them to the right people in the right place, and not. I look sometimes and we bring these kids into our system, and they think it's a badge of honor. As soon as I give them a photo number, oh man, we label them. They think that's their destiny. Oh, you know what? They told me I was going to be a criminal. Look, I got a PPN number, photo number, so I guess that's my plight. So part of this process is trying to understand that, what happens when I call a mom who says, I can't come and pick up my son? Is she a bad mother? What happens if she tell you, I have left work twice already. If I leave a third time, I'm fired. I mean, it's not often just about because parents don't want to be good parents. My mom raised 4 boys by herself, and she worked all day. She could not leave work to come back and see with her kids. We stayed out of trouble. It was difficult sometimes, but I mean, we have to make sure we continue to work to connect our young people to that mentorship and to those individuals. That's why I commend the officer in the front row here who takes this young man under his wing and lights that light in him. You ever met a child who's dark? You look in his eyes and his lights are not on. I mean, because his fire has been put out well before he even got to a chance to even be able to obtain something. So that's why I commend this young man down the end and his mentee over here and mentor, because that's the kind of work that changes our young people. Sometimes it don't have to be all. I have a young kid, and I know I can go wrong, so I apologize. But I got a young mentee I took to the shore, to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He's 12 years old and never been to the beach. Think about that. When he talked about he's never been rafting. Those are the things that are impactful to our young people. They don't need a lot. They just need something. Yeah.
Sarah Estlin from the COPS office. We know that policing happens locally, but a lot of decisions get made nationally, and you all four have a special expertise. So this question is to the panel. You have a lot of ears to a lot of offices. We're going to be making funding decisions. What is the one thing from the inside that you need the folk in this room to understand and take back to their offices to make the kind of change that you want to see happen?
For the Mark Center, we would appreciate the funding that it can last 24 hours, be open 24 hours. Because at 11 o'clock p.m., it goes back to old school policing. And unfortunately, kids run away after 11 o'clock at night. So they need the money, they need the staffing to be able to fund Mark Centers and similar centers for 24 hours, because it is a 24-hour job.
I would dovetail off of that, the emergency mobile psych services, it's not a 24-hour program. They are telephonic for 24 hours, but to be able to have someone at that officer's disposal or that family's disposal, whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, and right now there are no funds to offer that, as well as expanding the school-based diversion initiatives, keeping these kids out of jail, not making those arrests. Again, it's like pulling teeth to try to get those programs funded. But those really, I think, are, especially for at-risk kids, those are really important.
For me, funding, the difficulty with funding is as good as the money, right? I do a 2-year and I get everybody all jacked up, and then next the money's going and everybody's like, oh, I guess the program's going. I feel is and I'm not only saying that because Mr. Linsby's here and Scott's here, but the stuff that we're doing on where we're getting technical assistance. I didn't get cops, police department technical assistance. Oftentimes we don't have the skills and the ability to do that other kind of work. That how do you bring that collaborative work and those types of things, and that's not big dollars. That's kind of bringing in expertise. My friend from National League of Cities is here. Bringing in folks who can sit there and kind of walk you through that process. So, listen, we're all about replicating stuff. We're all about, but oftentimes, hey, do these programs. Well, how do I do that? You're asking me to make a major shift, moving to more social work. The stuff we're talking about is more social work. well, I don't have the expertise. I'm not a social worker, but bringing in that expertise and making those, so it makes it available to policing to say, hey, listen, you want to go down this process of diversion? Hey, let me bring in Judge Tetsky and the things that they're doing on OJ side, bringing those experts in to walk us through that path. Because all the time, it's not about money. It's about the mindset and about having those skills and poured it into you to help you do that process.
I can tell you that our officers really appreciate being able to bring the child to a location and back to work in 15 to 30 minutes. It used to be a problem. I don't want to deal with the juvenile. The only thing I want to do is just lock them up. But now they still get to be policemen, police officers. They still get to police. They still get to catch the bad guy, but they also get to help the child. And they don't have to be two different people.
Which has, obviously changed the rhetoric around police forces and especially Black men and women. Have you found that these two are correlated at all, and has this kind of polarized some of your conversations or like increased support at all for these programs that you're trying to implement?
I mean, for me, our program started before some of that occurred. For me, honestly, I've seen where Black Lives Matter has moved to more to a movement and really been effective. You've seen that in some of the cities. I struggled with that here in Philadelphia. I tried to get the members of the movement when I looked on their site and saw body cameras and school to prison policy. I said, we're doing that. Why don't you sit down and talk to me and let's have a conversation with me about that? But we could never seem to get to the table and discuss that. It still was a lot of issues going on between the movement and policing. So, I think there's an opportunity for a dialogue, but just people have the caution, this whole issue around disproportionality and DMC has been in the forefront well before this came on board, Black Lives Matter. It brought a lot of attention to the issue. But there's a lot of folks who have been working on the ground. I see a gentleman over here for 2 decades working on the ground, raising the awareness of, hey, we have an issue here. What has, though, from the movement has really put it on the radar of policing. Because we are the ones who create the disproportionality. We can't hide that. 80% of the kids who come into the system come in by policing. I used to argue with I said, listen, if I bring you all Black kids, then what are you going to do about it? You know what I mean? So policing, so that's why I keep saying that a lot of energy has to be put at the front end. Because we're the ones bringing the kids into the process. It is our biases, both implicit and explicit, are creating some of the environment where we're bringing young people and not giving them those opportunities that other kids in our communities are getting. And so until we change, until there's efforts and really put to the front end, we're always going to be dealing with that challenge, whether it be Black Lives Matter or any other movement. But I do believe the momentum is going in the right direction, and I think there's a lot of folks who are willing to line up, particularly leaders across the nation, to make that change.
Hi, so I have a question specifically for Louise, but really anyone on the panel, if you have relevant things to talk about, would be great too. But I was really encouraged to hear about all the programs to identify mental health and a lot of other high crisis situations, and I'm wondering if there are any programs through CRTY or anything else that deal with identifying victims of sex trafficking or people who might be showing symptoms of being at risk for being pulled up into that system or anything, and if that plays any role into any of these programs.
A lot of our law enforcement agencies are really active in training right now around sex trafficking. It's not necessarily a part of CITY, but it's certainly not exclusive. So, they may end up finding a child who may be at risk or already involved. So it's not specific to CITY, but certainly it's part of the larger dialogue that Connecticut is very, very involved in that right now.
As far as the sex trafficking, as I told you before, we're in a melting pot between 2 major metropolitan cities, New Orleans and Houston. So we have 5 or 6 casinos in Lake Charles. So we have a lot of influx of a lot of different people coming in. And the reason why I'd like to have a MARC center in every jurisdiction is because when you start talking about sex trafficking, we're only going to be able to use whatever tool you give us in a toolbox. There's nothing on the books that keeps us from re-traumatizing a child. If a child gets caught up in sex trafficking and is in another jurisdiction, That child has not broken any laws, but we don't have a tool in the toolbox that can give us an opportunity to keep that child until a parent or a guardian get there. So you're letting a police department or somebody babysit somebody that doesn't have any training for 8, 9, 10 hours. So that's why the MARC Center is so helpful, is because we can send the MARC there. We don't have to look in our criminal code book and say, how can we keep this child there? Because if we let them go, they're going to get right back into it. So we got to re-victimize them by charging them with prostitution or something else. That's the only tool we have in the box. We have nothing else there to help us. So a MARC Center in a jurisdiction would, if that happens, let's put this child over here, get them some help until we can get the right people there.
And that's why when you raise, it's very important that we don't leave out our females. You know, they have significant issues, and it manifests itself differently. They may not be out there shooting, but you know, they're out there doing other things. That you know, as you know, we were talking about it earlier. And when I facilitated a panel at OJJP about a month ago, and we had a couple of young ladies, 2 of them who had been in the sex trade and been human trafficking. You know what's basic thing they said, and we were talking about it earlier. You grab a police officer, you grab a runaway girl, a girlfriend run away. What the first thing we do? Take them home. She says, but you know, had the officer asked me why I'm running away from home, maybe would have found out that I'm being sexually or physically abused, and my mother's being physically abused, and I can't go home. You know, so we were talking about they either running to something or from something. And so part of that education in policing and education and women, so I right away went back to the police department and said, you know, we need to start making sure we're asking those questions. I mean, because are we missing something? And so I think it's very important that we don't just lump the females into just the whole collective group, because their issues are so much different and people prey on those differences. You know, so a lot of the work has to be done at that front end, because their offense may be a very low, minor offense that could be very major for them. But in our eyes, oh, it didn't shoot, rob, burglarize anybody, so you know what, let's just move along. Now, I think that whole mindset has to change and really get to the root issues as we talk about, and that often comes with something very simple happening to them. And we ask those very important questions, and we find out, hey, yeah, I'm being sexually abused, physically abused, and the like.
I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank all of you. You're all busy people, and your time is valuable. We appreciate you having shared that time with us today. So on behalf of the Vera Institute of Justice and all of our partners, thank you for coming.